All right, next up, we will have Paul Meuer, who is the land protection manager with Tall Pines Conservancy, which is a nonprofit land trust focused on protecting farmland, water resources, natural areas, and open space in northwestern Waukesha County. Paul.
Thank you very much. I'll try to have my own timer up here to keep track of how much time I have left. Okay, excellent. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I first want to start off by saying how fortunate I am to be here, and I think it's actually really interesting. So I grew up, I lived my first 10 years of life out of North Aurora, right across from the Red Oak Nature Center, if anyone knows where that's at. And so, you know, spent a lot of time on the Fox River, and have since moved away from it and never thought I'd be back working with the same river system that I grew up on. So it's kind of cool to be able to connect again with that. So in my current position as land protection manager with Tall Pines Conservancy, we are a nonprofit land trust, nationally accredited. We are based out of sort of the Lake Country region, so near Delafield, Wisconsin, and we serve most of Waukesha County, part of Dodge County, and part of Washington County as well. So we service a large area. One of the most exciting developments that have happened for our organization in December 28th of 2022, last minute, right before the end of the year, we signed off on a miraculous donation of a 260-acre farm just outside of Waukesha. Is there anyone in the audience that is from the Waukesha area? Okay, I see a few hands, awesome. Some of you may have driven past this farm a few times. It's located off of River Road or Highway I, and as you can see in this aerial, the Fox River flows through it. There's quite a few interesting features about this farm. Obviously, the Fox River being one of the highlights, but if I'm going to move forward here, is it the arrow?
No. It works. It always works.
Okay. All right. So just to give some geographic context here, this is sort of the layout of the farm. As I mentioned, the entirety of 260 acres were donated to Tall Pines Conservancy by a very generous donor who has an extensive history on the farm and didn't want to see it move into development, which is a rapidly occurring situation for the surrounding area. There's a significant loss of farmland, significant increase in development and impervious surfaces. So protecting farmland, protecting the natural resources on site are a huge concern. So like I said, Fox River flows through sort of the northeast parcel, but in addition to that, we also have a large riparian floodplain. We have wetland areas. We have sort of in the southern parcel, a large sort of mature oak woodland, and then some other really interesting features, as well as the workable farmland. So, you know, all of these sort of features combined really make this donation an incredible opportunity for our organization. But along with that, it's also a challenge. We are a small land trust. We do have 3 full-time staff, which is more than several other land trusts in the area. So we are fortunate in that aspect. But basically overnight, I became a landlord. We rent out the space. I also became a land manager for another 260 acres. And so whenever there's a tree down, or if there's something that needs to be taken care of, or if there's a toilet plug, I get the call. So it's a lot of work, and I think, you know, we've spent most of 2023 sort of thinking about what we want to achieve here, what our vision is, what our mission is for this incredible opportunity, but also challenge. So along that line, we have sort of come up with, you know, a mission and a vision, like I mentioned earlier, for the property. And it sort of intertwines with all the different resources that we have to work with here, but also looking at the surrounding area. What are some of the, you know, main issues that not only us as an organization face, but the river system, farmland practices in the area, and how can we serve as sort of a vector of change for that culture. I think it was mentioned earlier that, to influence a culture, to change it, you really have to be looking at the next generation. And that's sort of a big part of what we're looking to do here. So as part of our mission, which aligns with our organization, we are dedicated to farmland preservation, but that also ties in with farmland conservation practices. So a lot of the practices that were discussed earlier, no-till farm practices, cover crops, installing buffers, thinking about different crop rotations, nutrient management plans. Those are all sort of things that we're hoping to incorporate here. And along those lines, using the space that we have as sort of an education center that provides not only an opportunity for producers who are already engaged with conservation practices, but also for new and incoming farmers and those who want to practice agriculture, who may not have had an opportunity previously because of challenges with land access. So there's a lot that we can achieve there by not only providing the space, but providing a demonstration for some of the change that we want to see. And again, just making that into sort of a vibrant part of the community, sort of enhancing that thread of agriculture that we have and that we want to protect. I think also having those ecological aspects and showing how, sort of demonstrating how those interface with what we do on the land. So lots of opportunities there. So obviously the challenges, and I kind of spoke about this a little bit earlier, one being that we are a small staff. So building up capacity, building up sort of interest in the property and for what we can achieve. We've looked at working with different partners. One of our primary partners on the project is American Farmland Trust. We're currently working with them to establish a conservation easement to protect the property in perpetuity, and to also work with them on a land management plan. So sort of setting ahead a schedule for when to implement certain practices and how best to move forward. And so they'll be really a key partner with us moving ahead. We're also looking to, and I can actually go back to the aerial because I think that's helpful. Working with Ducks Unlimited to establish a knockout easements along the riparian corridor. So on that northern parcel where the Fox River flows through, if I were to point is basically following this edge here, the riparian edge is about 60 acres altogether. That's going to be placed within a knockout easement. So it's going to have federal level protection to it. And that'll also help open up some opportunities for additional funding for restoration. Right now, if you were to paddle down that river in that section, a lot of the stream bank is actually surprisingly intact. But what you would observe is that you have a lot of encroachment and dominance by invasive species such as red canary grass. And as we all know, with that current situation, if you were to have significant rainfall events, there's the potential for high levels of erosion. Also on the farm, we've identified certain areas where there are some primary resource concerns. So as of right now, currently, the producer who has been operating this farm for the past 3 decades has implemented some conservation practices, but not anything to sort of the level that we ultimately want to see. So thankfully, he's been wonderful to work with, and so we'll be sort of working ahead to try to implement different practices. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. But as you can see, there is a bit of a buffer. We'd like to see that buffer extended from the Fox River. But one of the main areas I want to point out is sort of in this image just south of the primary farmstead. You can see, especially right here, that's farm field that's right on the edge. So, what you don't see is the topography here. There's a slope, and that leads downhill and right into the stream. So immediately, that's one of the issues that we identified on the property. So when we think again about what kind of space we want to create and what we want to achieve on this property. I sort of laid out 4 different pillars, and this is something that our organization, our board, have put a lot of thought and time into thinking about breaking it down into these sort of 4 key elements that we want to focus on. So one of them is food. I know if anyone's been to the Sewer Pack booth, they talk about the food regional plan and sort of securing food resources for the region, for the greater Waukesha County area, but also extending out into Milwaukee County. So I think we have a great opportunity in front of us here to provide a space to generate locally produced food, but also welcome in folks who, again, first generation farmers, folks from underserved populations that have an interest in farming but have never had the capability of attaining land or the mentorship even as to how to get started with farming. So one of the plans that we have is to start with small plots, so sort of a community garden structure, use that plot to create fresh food that can then be sourced for local food banks and other nonprofits that are sort of focused on removing food insecurity in the region. Beyond that, we'd like to eventually expand to larger plots, so rentable acreage, so anything from 1 to 5 acres that a small, perhaps an urban farmer could rent from us for a reduced price, and would be able to operate that land. Ideally using some equipment that we might be able to supply, but also having that mentorship from some of the existing producers that, if you have a question about how to do something, you can come to this, to Ravensholme and access that sort of educational aspect, the hub that we hope to generate. The other element is, again, to serve as a resource. So, right now we have similar to Racine County, a producer-led watershed group called Farmers for Lake Country. And that producer-led group is sort of a peer-to-peer mentorship group. We utilize the Department of Ag funds to sort of incentivize practices throughout the watershed in the greater Lake Country region. We want to see that sort of expand. So, a lot of our audience every time is, it's the same farmers that we've been working with for a while, and we want to try to expand our reach and our practices to sort of a broader audience. So I think having a central hub, having a central education center will really help us with achieving that mission. So a space to host events, shed talks, some of those informal meetings, pizza and beer. People love, coming together for free pizza and beer. It's attracts quite an audience. So that's something that we hope to achieve here. Equity. So I want to talk about that, and I think in this process of thinking what we want to achieve here, we've had to kind of hold a mirror up to ourselves, our organization, and I think conservation in general, has a positive outlook, has a positive purpose. But when you think about some of the starting a meeting, I'm just going to ignore that. So when we think about equity and we think about the conservation objectives that we've been able to achieve, we think about the audience that we've been receptive to, and it's not always a diverse audience. If you're someone that's interested in a conservation easement, you have to have the privilege of owning land, and we haven't had that opportunity to really expand and broaden what conservation means to a greater group of people. And so having that equity, having that the knowledge that historically underserved populations haven't had the same privileges, haven't had the same opportunities for land access that we have, it's something that we need to carry moving forward. And with that in mind, like I said, having those reduced cost opportunities, reduced or free opportunities to rent land, really get involved with agriculture and expand what the audience is for agricultural conservation and preservation. I think that's not only important for those groups, but also for us. If we're going to remain viable in the future, it's important to reach to a broader audience. Stewardship. So lastly, stewardship is sort of our other tier. And like I mentioned, the awesome thing about this property is just the incredible interfaces that we have, from the mature woodlands to the Fox River, to the farmland. And I think being able to show how, our actions on the land influence sort of the outputs that we see in the water, and sort of vice versa. I really look forward to working with school groups, with students, with those interested in stewardship at home, and just sort of demonstrating what kind of changes we can realistically see. So moving ahead. Got it. So one of the practices that we're going to be implementing, and I don't know, just show of hands, how many people have heard of agroforestry before? Oh, wow. Oh, okay, cool. I used to say that to groups, and I'd get no one who would acknowledge what you're going to be a forester or a tree farm, and so it's awesome to know that agroforestry is kind of out there now. So again, in that sort of small area, that 15 acres that I pointed out earlier, where there is that primary resource concern, that's where we're looking to implement an agroforestry project. So we're working with the Savannah Institute to sort of design, develop, and apply for grant funding. And so for those who don't know, agroforestry is essentially the integration of trees into sort of more conventional agricultural systems. So whether that's crop rows, where you have alley crops and trees with different plants in between, or if it's sort of a more generalized grazing structure, there's a lot of things that you can do with agroforestry. The species that we've selected, and I can get a little bit more into that in a bit, are all sort of tailored to what's native to the region, and also what emerging markets might be. So yeah, I think this is a really exciting opportunity for us. I am amazed by the amount of excitement too from some of our more traditional farming community about seeing what agroforestry is all about. So there's just a slide from Savannah Institute talking a little bit about what we're hoping to achieve. Basically, again, it's all about the soil. It's about having permanent vegetation on the ground, and it's about sort of diversifying what agriculture means. So if we can have tree crops mixed with more traditional crops, that provides an example for other farmers to potentially adopt those practices, diversify farm income, and just sort of make a new model for agriculture. So we're excited to see how it all turns out, and fingers crossed this spring. Still, we're hoping for some climate smart commodity grant funds and some additional funding to help implement those practices. So this map is just sort of a general overview of what our planting plan looks like. Again, this sort of evaluates different conditions on the land. We have soil samples that were taken throughout this area. So we know the soil pH, we know the organic matter, and these species were all sort of selected based on what those what that feedback was from the soil sampling. So obviously down here along the river, we have sort of concentration of elderberry, grows very well in wet areas. Very easy to harvest. There's a huge market for it currently. Fast growing, will provide that sort of soil stabilization that we're really looking for. The aronia or some of the chokeberry is another sort of, I won't say there's a market for it currently, but it's one of the things that we're hoping to expand into, and by getting more producers on board, we'll hopefully generate that market. Pecan and pawpaw, I think that's a really interesting one. I personally love pawpaw. I don't know how many people have ever had a pawpaw fruit, but it's delicious, and it's slightly outside of the growing region. That might actually have changed with the changing of the hardiness zones, but yeah, so I'm super excited to just grow pawpaws for, I'll just eat them personally if no one else wants them. But and then lastly, in the center there, we sort of have more of a hardwood oak, hickory, and aspen sort of grouping, along with our windbreak. So the windbreak is again supposed to provide shelter for all of these smaller shrub plantings, but then the oak, hickory, and aspen is supposed to sort of emanate sort of a oak savanna restoration type community. So ultimately, with this sort of planting plan, it's very dense. We are going to have rows in between, but that's mainly just for management. The long-term idea here is to eventually have some sort of rotational grazing operation. That's a ways out. You have to wait for the trees to establish. You have to wait for the right conditions to be present. And this is just one phase of the agroforestry plan. If this goes well, if we like it, we're successful, we're hoping to expand to other areas. So again, this is just more some of the planning and calculations that have gone into what agroforestry really entails. This is, of course, looking at the soils in the area. And something I do want to point out that isn't present here is, like I mentioned, the farm itself has been very heavily under very heavy agriculture. It's been constantly tilled. Most recently has seen a reduction in tilling. And when I say that, I mean within the past 5 years, but there's very little organic matter out there. The soil is much like the sample here to the left, where, as you can imagine, during a heavy rainstorm event, you have that sort of runoff. And so conditions aren't great. And there's a lot of room for improvements. So, starting with moving into more no-till, implementing cover crops, those are all things that we hope to do this year. And it's just more, I don't think anyone can see that, but that's some of the samples. pH is just kind of all over the place. And like I said, those organic matter levels are significantly low. So this here is actually from Savannah Institute's demonstration farm in Spring Green. Spring Green, beautiful place. This all used to be conventional high-till agriculture up until I would say about 2018. And then Savannah Institute acquired this farm, sort of made it into their own hub, and have started to implement their agroforestry practices. And this is what it looks like today. So you can see a variety of different trees, different species, different sort of alley crop plantings. And beyond that, they're also routinely sampling and looking at nutrient runoff, so sort of that constant monitoring process to really assess what the improvements are to the soil conditions, what the improvements are to reducing nutrient runoff. Obviously, they have sort of a different soil structure and growing conditions than we do. Spring Green is in the driftless region of Wisconsin, so they have some very severe topography, very sandy soils, super highly erodible, and that's a little bit of what we're playing with at Ravensholme on the river, but it's again, it's a little bit more clayey, and we don't have the same level of topography. So hopefully at some point this is sort of what our farm will start to look like. So if I can go back really quick here, I just want to go back all the way to that first slide. So yeah, hopefully I would say our plan is to, again, plant this spring, and in conjunction with that, do some restoration in this area, clean up the buckthorn, remediate some of the reed-canary grass, introduce some native species, and really just kind of change the whole structure of Ravensholme on the river. And start to make it into the educational space and the demonstration area that we want it to be. So with that said, I think I have a few minutes for some questions. I hope there are questions because I think it's a really cool thing.
Is this upstream of Burning Marsh?
Thank you for pointing that out. So it is upstream of Vernon Marsh. Right across the road, across Highway I, is how many acres is Vernon Marsh? Does anyone know? It's like over 1,000 acres of wildlife refuge, and so again, just having that sort of interface with these pristine natural areas and tying that to farmland production, I think is a really unique opportunity to sort of demonstrate what we can do. Because farmland's not going anywhere. Food production should remain local. And I really do believe that there's a way to balance, having sustainable farm production, agricultural production, and protecting water resources.
Is that close to Waukesha West High School?
Yes, it is. So again, the unique thing about this location is it's maybe a 10-minute drive to downtown Waukesha. So, you come right out of the city. I know the high school is just north on River Road or off River Road. And so the location itself really makes it ideal for really drawing in, again, that diverse audience, the urban populations that we haven't been able to reach out to, get them really excited about agriculture opportunities, and sort of, foster that new generation interested in conservation, farmland preservation, and agriculture. I mean, one of the challenges that we face as an agricultural community is a loss of farmers. They're aging out, they're retiring. There isn't a lot of interest in continuing, and in fact, it's nearly impossible to continue with a lot of farming practices because a lot of people don't have the equity to get started. So many challenges in front of us, and hopefully this will just be sort of one big elemental piece of the puzzle to sort of help resolve that. So.
Can you explain the role that you're involved with the Land and Water Conservation District, the University of Wisconsin Extension Service, and NRCS? I'm assuming you get into Farmfield College.
Yeah, so I guess the question was involvement from NRCS, involvement with UW Extension, and what was the other one?
The Land and
Yeah, the Soil and Water Conservation District.
Conservation District.
Yeah. So we have obviously worked through NRCS for some EQIP funding for these practices, and then the county has been involved to a certain degree. Our Soil and Water Conservation District, we're unfortunately staffing changing and stuff like that. There's been some loss of those relationships, but we've been building those back, especially as we sort of look at a larger perspective. So hopefully we'll bring them on. Oh, yeah. So yeah, anyway, I'll end it there. Hopefully that was informative. Thank you all for the questions.